Friends, so today is Pesach Sheni. We all know the story of Pesach Sheni. It was in the desert the first year, the first anniversary of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and there were some people that they were impure. There's different opinions why they were impure. One opinion is they were carrying the remains of Yosef. And it turns out, mind you, and this is one of the questions we're going to ask, that someone who is carrying a dead body is ritually impure, so it takes 7 days to go through the process of purity. It involves being sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma de heifer and immersing in the mikveh. The day 7, they're 1 day shy. The day 7 coincided with Erev Pesach, the day that the korban was brought. It's 1 day. The next day already they were tahir. So one of the questions we'll ask it right now is, okay, so it's not fair, and they come with a whole complaint. Moishe Rabbeinu consults with God and says, okay, I'll have a second chance. You would have thought, when should you bring it? You have a whole 7 days to bring it. You have Yom Tov Pesach. And in fact, Shavuos and Sukkot, which is the other two Yom Tovim, when a Jew had to make go a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, to Beis Hamikdash, they're 7-day holidays, and when a person was obligated to bring then also Shalmi Chagiga, festive offerings, and you had 7 days. You had the whole Yom Tov to bring it. So logic would say, okay, and especially they're 1 day short. So and we're going to be celebrating 7 days. You bring it on Pesach. Why a month later? That also be answered in the course of our discussion. Let's begin our journey. What you're looking over here is from the Gemara. The Gemara brings first right-hand column. Right-hand column, we'll look at that first, and then we'll look at the left-hand columns. 3 opinions as to the definition of Pesach Sheni. Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He's the redactor, the one who compiled the Mishnah, the leader of the Jewish people. So he says that Pesach Sheni is regel b'fnei atzma, an independent Yom Tov. Let's go down the line. Second opinion, Rabbi Nosson says, no, tashlumin derishin, it compensates the first Pesach. And finally, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia, so a third view, he says, takanta derishin, it amends and is integral to the first. What does this mean? This chart will now explain. So we have to understand the legend. So Shin, look at the bottom of the page, wherever the word Shin means, it stands for Shogeg, and that means a person did not bring the first Pesach because he lived far away, or he was impure, couldn't help it, or he was ill, inadvertent. It wasn't deliberate. Mem stands for mazid, intentional. Okay, that's the legend. Now we're going to go through the charts and we'll see where they differ. Just to get heads up also, one more thing you have to explain. On the extreme left of the chart, the word kodesh, which I translate there as liable. Now that's not the translation. Kodesh means literally to be cut off. Kodesh is a punishment that the Torah mentions for certain sins, and there are different kinds of kodesh. One of it could mean, depending on the sin, dying before 60. Cut off, premature death. Could also mean dying without children. Could also mean being cut off in the next world, which is the most severe kind of cutting off for idolatry and other severe transgressions. So, just by the way, I mentioned the first thing is 60. So we find in the Gemara that when Rabbi Yosef, when he turned 60, he made a Suda. It's a milestone in a person's life because he's past this premature 1-level punishment death, which is the age of 60. Put that aside. Now, why are we mentioning it? Because the Torah says the person deliberately, Torah says, does not bring the Paschal offering. It's not a courtly punishment. Kodesh is by heaven, heavenly punishment. Chayiv Kodesh. There are other transgressions too. It's a long list. So that's the question here. When does a person incur liability? And we're going to play with every possible combination of shogeg and mazid, inadvertent and intentional. Let's go through them. We can start with Rabbi. And we're going to go through, we're going to go like this. We're going this way, down, across. So Pesach Rishon, the person, he was sick, Shoigeg. And Pesach Sheni came along and he wanted a month later, which is today. We're learning about today's Pesach Sheni, right? So he wanted to bring the korban again. He was prevented by circumstances beyond his control. Obviously, check means not check. We'll call it a cross, yeah? Not liable, clearly. Not liable. He's a shoigig on both occasions. We're clear? Now, what happens is the first time, mazid, he could have but didn't. So he incurs the liability then. But he could wipe it off if he brings it on the second Pesach. For the second Pesach, he was a shin, he was a shoigig. Too bad, he's still liable because he didn't wipe it off. He incurred liability. Through the second time, he would have liked to, but was prevented. Doesn't help. Liability has been incurred. The same is true of the next scenario. You can see it's the strictest. Shin, the first time he was a shoigig. He didn't incur any liability then because he couldn't help himself. But then came the second one, and he could have, but deliberately didn't. So Rabbi says it's an independent yontif, which means that it has the power to incur liability on its own right. So you didn't bring it on Pesach Sheni, Chayiv, there's a check there, he's liable. And certainly in the third scenario, if he was deliberate in both cases, he's obviously liable. We're clear? Now at the bottom it says there, ger and godel, adult and convert. The question is, what if a boy becomes bar mitzvah between the first Pesach and the second Pesach? Or somebody converts. Do you bring it? Rabbi says, yes, it's a separate yontif. You weren't obligated the first time because you weren't Jewish or because you were under bar mitzvah, but now you are, and since he considers it a separate yontif, he's obligated. Clear? Okay, that's pretty clear. Now, Rabbi Nosson says that Pesach Sheni is not a separate yontif. Therefore, right away, someone who converts in the middle or becomes bar mitzvah is not liable because it's not a separate obligation. It only compensates for the first. So if you were never obligated round one, you have no obligation round two either. That's clear. You see the bottom of that little column. But let's go through the scenarios and we see what's going to happen. All agree, of course, everybody says that if round one, Pesach one, and Pesach Sheni, shoigeg, a person was inadvertent, it wasn't deliberate, obviously not liable. Now let's see the next scenario. So the first case, he was deliberate. Mazid, did he incur liability? He did. Came Pesach Sheni, he wanted to but couldn't. Sorry, you're still liable. You didn't clean the slate. You had that liability and you didn't wipe it off. Here's where he argues with Rabbi. What happens if, in the first case, he was what? A shoigeg. Did he incur liability? No. Now, the second case, he was deliberate. But according to Rabbi Nosson, this is not a yom tov in its own right. It cannot confer liability. It's only there to compensate if he didn't the first time. So you're not liable if the second time you were deliberate. Rabbi says yes, because he says that Pesach Sheni has the same force of liability and obligation as the first one. Rabbi Nosson says no, it's only there to compensate. It cannot confer liability. So if the first time you were inadvertent, unintentional, and even though the second one you were intentional, not enough to make you liable. Clear? Of course, the third scenario, of course, you're liable because you incurred liability the first time, and it was not what you were deliberate the second time. Obviously, all agree that in the third scenario, all agree with the first and the second and the fourth. Their only argument is the middle two cases. Clear? Now comes the third view. Interestingly, Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia. Now, let me explain what he says. What's between compensates for the first and amends integral to the first? Here's the distinction. Rabbi Nosson says, the first one, if you are deliberately don't do it, you incur liability. But you can clean it. You can clean it up. You can fix it. You can compensate. And if you don't, even though you couldn't help yourself, you've still got the liability hanging over your head for round one. Rabbi Nosson said, there's no liability round one. We've got to see what happens round two. It's factored into. The Pesach Sheni is integral to the first. So you'd never incur liability round one unless it turns out in the end you were deliberately didn't bring it round two. So the only one he finds him liable is the last case. Mazid. All the other cases he's not, because you don't curl liability. The jury is out. We'll see what happens. Pesach Sheni. It's like it's already in. It's like one long yontif. Okay, that's Rabbi Hananya ben Akav. Okay, good. We're clear. Now turn the page. Here comes out today's question. We hope to quickly answer it. Beautiful, and a lot of what you have on the second page here from the Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Sefer HaMitzvahs is the book of commandments that the Rambam Maimonides lists all 613. This is positive command number. Can you see what number it is? Top of the page? 57. Without translating it, you can see it there. He says Pesach Sheni is positive command 57. Yeah. It's on the list of the 248 positive commandments. Is number 57. What's our question? Rambam, why are you considering Pesach Sheni as an independent mitzvah? Even the Rabbi, who says it's a mitzvah in its own right, it's a Yom Tov in its own right, but ideally, you don't do it. If you did the first Pesach, there's no Pesach Sheni. And the Rambam only counts independent mitzvahs. Pesach Sheni only kicks in if you didn't do Pesach Rishon. Why would he consider it as an independent mitzvah of the 613 commandments? It should be a detail in the first Pesach. Just to explain, if you count in the Torah, how many times it says do or don't do, it's in the thousands. How do you get the number 613? Because most of them are details within one general mitzvah. They don't warrant their own designation as one of the 613. So why does Pesach Sheni, according to the Rambam, warrant a designation as an independent mitzvah when you only do it if you didn't do the first one? In fact, most Jews of history did not do Pesach Sheni, even though it's so how do you list that as a commandment to do? No, you shouldn't have to do it. All should go well, but he's healthy and well, you do it the first time. So the answer is, you're going to explain now, that the reason that the Rambam is because it lists it as a separate mitzvah, because spiritually it's a whole different, it's not just you didn't do it the first time, so whatever you can now do what was done then, you can do it now. It's not. It's a higher order. And what is it? Teshuvah. Teshuvah is not simply a lost opportunity. We can always make up for it. It actually takes us beyond, incredibly, the power of Teshuvah is that it takes us beyond even had we not failed the first time. Place where the Baal Teshuvah stands, the tzaddik cannot stand. Now we're going to explore this a little bit, but that's the essence of our answer. Why does the Rambam list it separately? Because it's not just simply a detail in the first Pesach. It's really a whole different order. It's a whole different order, the power of Teshuvah. So let's just first tell the story. The truth is that Teshuvah really doesn't make sense. Because what was finished. You messed up. I messed up. Going further, okay. Going further, you learn from your mistakes. We won't repeat the mistake again. You can't fix a past mistake. Like time, it's over. I mean, it happened in the past. How do we stretch back to the past? And that's what Shuvah means. We actually turn around the transgression, which is why in the story, God did not command Pesach Sheni. I mean, another question. Were you playing games with us? When you first gave us the commandment of Pesach, say, and if you couldn't do it the first time, you got to say, no, mom's the word. God doesn't say word. What happens? People come up and say, bang you on heaven's door. It's not fair. Why you should be left out. It says, oh, fantastic. Pesach Sheni. Why? Because really it's beyond the system. So Teshuvah comes from a place in the Jewish heart, in the soul, in the neshama, that is one with God and says, I messed up here, but here I was always loyal. And that's higher than Torah. That's higher than Torah. Torah basically is this. God's here, I'm here, here's Torah. Do we connect? Don't do, you don't connect. That's true as far as Torah is concerned. But there's a deeper place in my neshama that with or without Torah, I'm connected. That's the truth. That's the truth, the deepest truth. And that's what these Jews were saying. We're always connected. We want to reveal that down here. God says, oh, beautiful. We're going to add something to Torah which would not be in the system. It's called Teshuvah. It's not in the system to begin with, because the system is a system. You follow the rules, you're connected. You don't, you're not. And here a Jew is saying, I know that's the rules, but I can't accept it. There's a place in me that says, what do you mean I'm not connected? What do you mean I'm not? And Pesach is like the birth of the people. It's like symbolically, what do you mean I'm not Jewish? It's symbolically the identity of the Jew. That's why it only happens when the law of Pesach, this whole not fair. What about other laws? We don't find that protest, because this one addresses transparently the whole identity being Jewish. What do you mean I'm not a Yid? Therefore, not having a part of the celebration of being Jewish, which is what Pesach is. Moishe says, you're right, I'll consult right away. And God says, that's what I was waiting to hear. That Jew's chutzpah, this humble demand that don't cut me out. And we're going to rewrite the rules now. There's a Pesach Sheni. It's the power of Teshuvah, and it has the power to redeem the past. Why? Because there comes a place beyond the system. It's higher than time. I'm eternally Jewish, no matter what happens in time and space and what I did. It's eternal. And because it's eternal, it can redeem that. How does it redeem it? Because understand what happens here. What makes me cry out in Teshuvah? What I did, that unlocked the essence of my soul, the deepest part of me. That unlocked the deepest part of me, is that anguish and regret. That unlocked the deepest connection, deeper than if I just told a line and be a good boy and doing life is good and doing Torah mitzvahs. The connection is not so deep, like in a marriage, friends. It's meant to be in a marriage. There's going to be pain and hurt and disappointment, etc. Because either one or two things happen. Either, okay, it's over, goodbye, or we go deeper. That compels a deeper connection, a deeper devotion, a deeper appreciation. What causes deeper appreciation? It's because of the hurt. So that transforms it. Because look what it led to. You still love me? You said, wow, that he's devoted now on a whole new level. Why? Because of what he did. Or what she did. So that's transformative. And that's what Pesach Sheni is. Now the beauty here is, friends, we're going to see 3 levels of Teshuvah. But before we do that, I just want you to turn the pages to appreciate the story and the power of Teshuvah. The next quote, it's in, I'll just say it in English. Do I have the English? I translate it. It's from Yalkut Shimoni. No. Yalkut Shimoni, I'll read the translate, top of the page, which says Yalkut Shimoni on Noach 7:02. It's just Hebrew. Sholu l'chochma. They asked wisdom. What's the punishment of the sinner? Amalu, wisdom answered back, sinner, evil will pursue them. They're done. They're out. Then they asked prophecy. What happens to the sinner? Amalu, prophecy answered, death. You sinned. That's it. Your life is worthless. Death. That's the answer of prophecy. Shaul the Torah, and then they asked Torah, what should the sinner do? So the Torah answered, Yavi Osham, let him bring a guilt offering and be atoned. But the problem with that is the guilt offering is only for a small number of sins, and not the worst ones in the book either. I mean, they're sins. A person denied for example, a person denied an article is trusted. He denied monetary. He denied a monetary obligation, and he was guilty, and it was proven that he owed the money. So he has to bring a guilt offering. It's a terrible sin, but there are worse sins, and there's no guilt offering. So what kind of answer? So the question that continues, what's going to be? Finally, Shola LaKadosh Baruch Hu. They asked Hashem, what this message is telling us, we're going beyond Torah. Torah says certain sins you can atone for. Others, sorry, mate, you're out. Shola LaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then they asked, who's the they? Against souls are asking. Says, Hashem answered, yes, it's true, is happily do tshuva. This medrash conveys succinctly that teshuva is higher than Torah, which is the rule book. Like you're given a recipe, and you're told, this is how you make the cake. You didn't follow the recipe, that cake is finished. You can't turn that cake into a cake anymore. Over. Yet teshuva does. Teshuvah goes back and fixes the whole thing. And the next quote, which we're all familiar with, it's in the English. You know the story of Elazar, turn the page. This is from the Gemara Avodah Zarah. Elazar bar Dodaya, you know the story with him. He didn't leave any prostitute that he didn't visit, and he heard about one, and he had to travel 7 oceans and said a whole 7 rivers he crossed, and it cost a fortune. And when he was with her, she tells him the whole world's going to be accepted in Shuvah, but not you. That's what she tells him. And he leaves her. He puts his head between his knees and he starts this whole story called "Heaven Help Me, can help you." Prophets, the others, they all, no one can help him. He puts his head between his knees. He cries out and he died. He said, here's the quote. Elazar ben Dodaya said, "Clearly the matter depends on nothing other than myself." He was calling, "Help me." He placed his head between his knees and cried loudly until his soul left his body. A divine voice emerged and said, "Rabbi Elazar bar Dodaya is destined for life in the world." Rabbi became Rabbi, never mind, he was the biggest sinner in the world. And now he's Rabbi and destined for life in the world to come. Here again, it's beyond the system, comes from the essence of the soul that's one with the Eibishter, that's eternal. And we see from here also is that it can happen in an instant, which is why Pesach Sheni is one day. The first Pesach is the tzaddik. It's 7 days, nature, orderly progression. He follows the rule book. He learns more, gets closer. Everything is beautiful. The Baal Tshuva is radical. It's one day. It can happen in a second, just like Rabbi Rabbi, what did I do? That's it. And then a second, radical change and transforms his whole past, which is why Pesach Sheni is one day, and why Pesach Sheni, the chametz, you don't have to get rid of chametz today. And the temple stood. Chametz represents the Yetzer Hara. The tzaddik has rejected the Yetzer Hara. He lives a perfect life. The Baal Tshuva has transformed the Yetzer Hara. He's transformed his past. So the chametz is with him. I just want to go back to the 3 views here very quickly. And there are 3 levels of teshuvah, starting from the bottom one. The 3 levels, the 3 kinds of teshuvah, and the third one is the ultimate, in a way, the most shocking. Start with Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson says that this is the power of teshuvah. Teshuvah compensates. So a person sinned, he sinned, but then he has the power afterwards to fix it. That's why he lost himself, the desire, etc. And you can always do teshuvah and compensate and fix the past. Rabbi Nosson, the bottom one, who says it's integral to the first, is a deeper teshuvah. Sometimes our sin is more insidious. We know that it's wrong. It's not like we lost ourselves. We know. First level is he lost himself, he completely distracted and got completely caught up. Sometimes, like we know, but we say, okay. And then we're even smarter. We say, I'll do teshuvah later. So that's insidious because we're actually using teshuvah to sin. In the words of our sages, echte v'ashev, I'll do teshuvah later. Our sages say about that, you're not given a chance to do teshuvah later. Says Rabbi Hananya, you're not given a chance. If you really push, you can. That is a deeper teshuvah. That's a power teshuvah that's integral to the sin. Even when the teshuvah is in Pesach Sheni is integral to Pesach Sheni. It's factored into it, which means I did my sin because of the teshuvah I'm going to do later. And the Gemara says, you won't be helped. And Pesach Sheni says, but you can still do it. So that's even a higher power of teshuvah. Now, what's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? He says it's an independent yontif, which really, we try to understand, but you only do it if you didn't do it the first time. So what do you mean it's independent yontif? You know what he's talking about? Rabbi's talking about the teshuvah of tzaddikim. Rabbi's talking about the tzaddik doing teshuvah. Gewalt, how can a tzaddik do teshuvah? So I've told you the story very briefly. We've got another minute to go. That illustrates this beautifully, the teshuvah of a tzaddik. Life is perfect. He's a beautiful boy. It's light. It's good. So the story is a true story that happened. Rab Sadia Gaon was a great Jewish leader of his time, lived about 900 years ago. So Rab Tzaddik Gaon was the greatest leader of his day. He came once to a hotel, an inn, the Jewish innkeeper, and spent some time in this town. People coming to him for questions and blessings and guidance. The innkeeper didn't know when he came at night who it was, and finished. Next morning he sees it, the whole people coming. Oh, everybody's coming to see. So this is the guest he received the night before is Rab Tzaddik Gaon. The story, he falls to his feet and kisses his feet. Rebbe, forgive me. Tzaddik Gaon picks him up. My good man, what? For what? He said, the way I received you last night. Tzaddik Gaon said everything was in perfect order. Yes, Rebbe, he says tearfully, but had I known it was you, it would be completely different. So the tshuva of the tzaddik, which is not easy, is as his appreciation of Hashem and the gifts of life and everything of being Jewish deepens. The way I served you yesterday was lacked. He does tshuva even on his mitzvahs. That's the tzaddik's tshuva. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is saying, the great leader. You think tshuva is only for the sinner. The tzaddik has to do tshuva. It's a Yom Tov on its own. It's not like you did the first Yom Tov, as it were. Everything is good. But to be satisfied in your service of God, no. Learn from the Baal Tshuva to go beyond. And one final word that Rebbe said, what does it mean for the tzaddik to do tshuva practical? Close your Gemara and go and help and inspire you to do tshuva. And you'll be lifted by his tshuva. That's the tshuva of the tzaddik. That's the highest level. A Yom Tov, they're both a Yom Tov. But it's a Yom Tov for itself, the tshuva of the tzaddik. Okay, friends.
Wow.
Have a wonderful day.